One of the greatest threats to business today is the weaponization of the government against the American people. I've been covering a lot of these topics over the last couple of weeks, and my research keeps bringing me back to one person, Ray Epps. Who is Ray Epps? You have probably heard of him. He was at the Capitol during the January 6th protests. There are a number of conspiracy theories claiming that he was an undercover FBI agent. The theory is that the feds were in the crowd to instigate and entrap protesters. People are furious with Ray Epps. There is so much anger towards this one person. I'm going to walk through what we know about Ray Epps and why it matters. First, let me say, do not send him any hate. He has been receiving death threats. Don't do that. That's not helpful. And at the end of this video, I will be giving you some better things that you can do that will make a difference. Just last month, Ray Epps gave an interview on 60 Minutes. They went through all the reasons why Ray Epps is accused of being an undercover Fed. There was video evidence on January 5th of Ray Epps shouting at a crowd, "Tomorrow, we need to go into the Capitol." The next day, on January 6th, there is more video evidence of Ray Epps shouting at a crowd, "We are going into the Capitol." There is video evidence of Ray Epps whispering into the ear of another protester seconds before the protesters breached the barriers. A female police officer was knocked down, and Ray Epps proceeded past them and continued to walk towards the Capitol. Ray Epps then left the Capitol when people started climbing the walls. He sent a text to his nephew saying, "I was in the front with a few others. I also orchestrated it." After January 6th, Ray Epps was included on the FBI wanted list. However, after an hour phone call, Ray Epps was removed from the list and not investigated further. Wow, that is a lot of suspicious activity. But in the 60 Minutes interview, Ray Epps explains everything away, saying that he was only there to peacefully protest. He claims he was actually trying to stop the insurrection. He says it was actually Tucker Carlson's fault for getting the crowd worked up. Ray Epps is asked directly, "Did anyone from the government ask you to be here? Anyone from the FBI?" He responds, "No." When I watched this interview, I was confused. Why weren't they asking any tough questions? I don't think his story makes any sense. If he was just there to peacefully protest, why would he watch a policewoman get pushed down in front of him and then march onto the Capitol? If he didn't do anything, why would he text a confession in writing to his nephew? It seems to me that this is the type of case a prosecutor would call a slam dunk. But instead of challenging Ray Epps, the interviewer just gave him softball questions. Now, why would a hard-hitting news show do that? This was the first January 6th protester they have ever had on 60 Minutes, and they gave him a glowing interview. What is so strange about Ray Epps is the huge contrast in the treatment of the other protesters. 1,000 people have been charged for the Capitol riot. The founder of Oath Keepers, Stuart Rhodes, was convicted of seditious conspiracy. He never went into the Capitol building and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Proud Boys chairman Enrique Tarrio was also found guilty of seditious conspiracy. Enrique Tarrio was not even at the Capitol grounds. He was sitting in his hotel room in Baltimore. Let me give you another example. Pamela Hemphill is a 69-year-old grandmother from Boise, Idaho, and she is dying from breast cancer. She is a citizen journalist who is at the Capitol to video the protests. When the protests started happening, she followed the crowd inside with her camera and started taking video. This is not someone who was trying to overthrow the government, and yet she was sentenced to 2 months in prison. Let me give you another example. Rachel Genko was on video doing the same things as Ray Epps. She was actually standing next to Ray Epps at the first barrier. She was walking around in a restricted area outside the Capitol building. She didn't even go inside. She was arrested and charged with trespassing on restricted Capitol grounds, and she faced 1 year in prison, which was ultimately reduced to 1 year probation. This woman did the exact same thing as Ray Epps. Nothing happened to Ray Epps, and this woman is facing prison. Does that seem fair? Now, if you think it is justified that all of these people are being locked away in prison, don't you think it's at least reasonable to ask Ray Epps about all of his suspicious behavior? And don't you think it is strange that the news media never asks him any tough questions? When he says, "No, I didn't do anything wrong," the news media says, "Okay, nothing to see here." I think it's strange. And I'm not the only one to think this. The video of the 60 Minutes interview has been ratioed. For those of you who do not know YouTube lingo, ratioed means that a video receives more negative comments than likes. This is a sign that the public does not like what you are doing. You can see from these screenshots that 60 Minutes received way more comments than likes. And I went through these comments. I did not see a single positive comment. Everything was negative. 60 Minutes was ratioed. Just to give you a sample of what people are saying, Ray Epps is the only Trump supporter ever to have the full support and defense of leftists and media. That alone deserves investigation. I'm 100% convinced by this interview that Ray Epps is a federal agent. It's hard to see our Capitol under attack. Bro, you literally told them to do this, frowny emoji. We're going to go into the Capitol. Ray Epps on camera in front of hundreds of witnesses. If I didn't think he was a Fed before, I definitely think he is a Fed now. It goes on and on. People are not buying the story. Then the 60 Minutes interview gets more strange. After interviewing Ray Epps, they switched to interviewing a government researcher named Tom Joscelyn, who helped write the final report for the January 6th committee. He speaks for the government and confirms that Ray Epps did nothing wrong. He says that Ray Epps was so unimportant that they did not even include him in the final January 6th report. I think it's important to know who Tom Joscelyn is. Do you remember when Joe Biden pulled American troops out of Afghanistan? It was a massive failure, and the U.S. left $7 billion of military equipment behind. Tom Joscelyn is the guy who went on CBS and explained that the failure of the Afghanistan withdrawal was Trump's fault. He said, "The deal that President Trump and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo signed in Doha with the Taliban on February 29, 2020, that was really the death blow to Kabul and the Afghan government." This is a person who is willing to ignore the obvious faults of Joe Biden in order to blame Trump. I believe that people call this Trump derangement syndrome. A quick look at Tom's Twitter page shows a lengthy history of tweets against Trump, Tucker Carlson, Alex Jones, election deniers, and even this post against Chinese billionaire Miles Guo, who I have previously reported is being unfairly prosecuted in New York. Tom Joscelyn is entitled to his opinions, but he is extremely partisan. Why didn't 60 Minutes reveal this during the interview? And why was this the guy who wrote the January 6th report? That doesn't seem very fair. In fact, this is exactly the type of person who would try to weaponize the report to get Trump. But there is more. Tom Joscelyn is a senior fellow at a Washington, D.C. think tank called the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. This organization was founded 2 days after the September 11th attacks and has close ties to the FBI and CIA. Former chief advisors include former CIA Director James Woolsey and former FBI Director Louis Freeh. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, but I do think it is a bit of a conflict of interest to have someone talking about Ray Epps with close ties to the FBI and CIA. Just giving you my opinion, if I wanted the truth, I wouldn't listen to a word this guy has to say. But it gets worse. More video footage has come out about Ray Epps. This is a screenshot of him breaching the second barrier at the Capitol. The Capitol was protected by 2 barriers. We already saw Ray Epps breach the first barrier. Here you can see him inside the second barrier, inside the restricted area at the Capitol building. This was revealed during the court cases against the protesters. Let us recap what happened. There was a breach at the first set of barriers. Ray Epps was there. There was a breach at the second set of barriers. Ray Epps was there right up front. I don't think this video is consistent with his story of being a peaceful protester. So why didn't 60 Minutes ask Ray Epps about why he breached the second barrier? Ray Epps has threatened to sue Fox News and anyone who reports on this story. I don't want to be sued. Let me state for the record that I have seen no evidence that proves that Ray Epps works for the FBI. But what I have seen is evidence that the FBI does use undercover agents to entrap people. In October 2020, the FBI arrested a group for attempting to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. They didn't actually kidnap anyone, they were plotting to kidnap someone. That was their crime. Whitmer had imposed aggressive lockdowns during the COVID-19 pandemic. The FBI used a dozen informants and several undercover operatives. That's nearly as many informants as defendants in the case. Further, it came out during trial that one of the informants, a woman, slept in the same hotel room as one of the defendants, a man. It appears like this woman was trying to seduce her target and then convince him to commit a crime so she could arrest him. When the jury learned about this, they would not convict. In a shocking outcome, the jury was deadlocked. If these men were so guilty, why would a jury of their peers refuse to convict them? That seems strange. The judge declared a mistrial. The judge then started a new trial, and 2 people were ultimately convicted of kidnapping conspiracy. One was sentenced to 16 years in prison and the other to 19 years in prison. The FBI's questionable tactics are not limited to the Governor Whitmer case. OpenTheBooks.com published a report showing that federal agencies paid out at least $548 million to informants in recent years. That was $294 million from the FBI, $237 million from DEA, and $17 million from ATF. These informants were sometimes given permission to commit crimes to further their undercover work. Between 2011 and 2014, there were 22,800 authorizations to commit a crime. Just so you understand this, your tax dollars are going to pay informants to commit fake crimes so the FBI can arrest people. In these cases, the FBI is actually creating more crime. This is the weaponization of the government against the American people. They are taking your tax dollars and using them to attack you with. The people they are targeting are anyone who opposes the people in power. The true irony about the Gretchen Whitmer case is that the defendants had legitimate concerns about what the governor was doing. On October 2nd, 2020, the Michigan Supreme Court found that the governor's use of emergency powers to issue COVID lockdowns was unconstitutional. What the governor was doing was illegal. The men were arrested by the FBI 6 days after the Supreme Court decision. What bothers me the most about the 60 Minutes interview is they used very specific language. Let me put up the question again. Did anyone from the government ask you to be here? Anyone from the FBI? Ray Epps responds, no. Now I remember when Ray Epps was called to testify behind closed doors for the January 6th committee. If you look at the transcript, they use very similar language. Did you ever work for the FBI? No, sir. The Metropolitan Police Department? No, sir. The CIA or NSA? No, sir. These are the wrong questions. Undercover informants are not necessarily on the payroll of the FBI. We saw an example of how law enforcement works with the release of the Twitter files. Here's an email between the head of Twitter safety, Yoel Roth, and FBI agent Elvis Chan discussing information requests from the State Department, FBI, DHS, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, NSA, and the CIA. The Twitter files show us how all these federal agencies were using a third-party company to attack Americans' freedom of speech. The FBI paid Twitter $3.4 million to work for them. Why couldn't the same thing have happened in the case of Ray Epps? The FBI contracts out to a third party who hires Ray Epps. Then the FBI could pay and direct Ray Epps and still say under oath that he never worked for them. Why has no one subpoenaed Ray Epps' bank records to see if he was getting paid by anyone? Why has no one subpoenaed Ray Epps' phone records to see who he was talking to? In fact, we have evidence that there were undercover FBI informants at January 6. In court papers in the Proud Boys sedition case, it came to light that there were at least 8 informants inside the Proud Boys organization. One of these informants, Greg Mitwerter, was posing as the group's vice president. He flipped and decided to testify in support of the defendants. Greg mysteriously had a heart attack on his way to testify. This is starting to seem very strange. It gets worse. Court papers reveal that DC Metro Police had at least 13 undercover agents on January 6. Also, another agency called Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, had 19 undercover agents. HSI is a division of ICE, which is a division of DHS. That means we now know of at least 40 undercover agents. These are agents who are on video cheering bystanders to go into the Capitol. 40 people? How does the number keep growing? I'm beginning to understand why people are starting to call this the Fed-surrection, not the insurrection. To be fair, the government has only admitted to 8 undercover agents so far and has not yet acknowledged the others. So was Ray Epps an employee of HSI? We don't know because no one has ever asked him. 2 weeks ago, the issue of undercover informants came up at a congressional hearing with 4 whistleblowers from the FBI. The FBI has been refusing to release the security footage from January 6. One whistleblower claims the reason they were told the FBI was not releasing the footage was because there may be undercover officers or confidential human sources on those videos whose identity we need to protect. If someone had the tapes, they could compare the people who got arrested with the people who didn't get arrested and figure out who the informants were. This is also in contrast to what the head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, testified to Congress. When Wray was asked if there were any undercover officers, he said, "As I'm sure you can appreciate, I have to be very careful about what I can say about when we do and do not, and where we have and have not used confidential human sources. But to the extent there's a suggestion, for example, that the FBI's confidential human sources, or FBI employees, in some way instigated or orchestrated January 6th, that's categorically false." So Wray is saying undercover agents were not involved in January 6th. The whistleblowers are saying they were involved. Someone is lying, and I would guess that the liar is the same person who will not release the footage. What is even more suspicious is that Senator Ted Cruz asked senior FBI official Jill Sanborn about Ray Epps. This was at a congressional hearing under oath. Ted Cruz asked, "Was Ray Epps a Fed?" Her response was, "Sir, I cannot answer that question." What? If Ray Epps was not a Fed, why didn't she just say no? Attorney General Merrick Garland was also asked about Ray Epps under oath. He refused to answer, saying he would not comment on an ongoing investigation. What? If Ray Epps was not a Fed, why didn't he just say no? This is getting really bizarre. Am I the only person who thinks this is strange? Ray Epps is not the real issue here. The reason why people are so upset is because there seems to be a double standard. Why is Ray Epps being treated one way when everyone else is being treated differently? People are going to prison for years, and Ray Epps is getting softball questions on 60 Minutes. I believe the American people have an innate sense of justice. It's part of who we are. We know what is right and wrong, and we value that. We stand for truth, justice, and the American way. If you are upset about Ray Epps, the best thing you can do is trust yourself. You know what is right. And if something doesn't seem right, it's okay to speak your mind. It's okay to ask questions. You should not be ashamed of this. You should celebrate it. That's what I call being a red-blooded American. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Ray Epps is a Fed? Go ahead and leave your thoughts down below. I'm Zach from Wolves in Finance. Thank you for watching.